welcome to Bristol Legal, the show dedicated to bringing you a different variety of issues, legal and non-legal. My name is Elizabeth Nowakowski. I'm a professor at Bristol Community College, and welcome to the program. Today I have two special guests, co-founders of a new organization in Fall River called FR Pride. I'm very pleased to introduce you to my immediate left, Karina Valencia, a local attorney, and right next to her, Nikita Santiago, who is a public health professional. Welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
So tell us more about your organization. FR Pride was launched last year, I believe.
Yes, last
Can you
September.
tell us what is it about? It's what is this organization and what its mission is?
FR Pride is a local LGBT resource center. Our mission is to support the well-being of our local lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender population here in our own community. Our mission really is to strengthen our community by promoting human rights and self-determination for all people. And we're working towards these ideals by creating opportunities for integration and inclusion, by enhancing cultural competency through education, and increasing the visibility of our local LGBT population.
So that's great. I mean, that sounds. So I assume there was a need for this organization. There is nothing like this in this area. I think there is something in New Bedford, right?
Yeah, there is. I think it's the
South Coast LGBT Network.
Okay.
Yeah, in New Bedford.
But tell me more. The organization is meant to provide services for members of LGBT community, but also for families of those, right?
Yes. Yep.
So how do you envision doing that? What is sort of the plan, long-term plan?
The long-term plan would be to really have a open and active resource center with a drop-in center for youth and families to have support. However, in the immediate, we're kind of working with a licensed clinical therapist to provide individual and family treatment.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me more about the therapist and the treatment. What is that about? How would that work?
So right now, it's really difficult to find local therapists who are culturally competent or practiced with the LGBT community previously. And that includes not just parents of LGBT identified children, but also families where the parents are LGBT and maybe their children are experiencing some pushback in school, or they may still be having acceptance issues with their larger family. There's actually a fairly large community of LGBT persons in Bristol County. And as you mentioned, there's the organization in New Bedford, but there wasn't anything specific to Fall River. And we've actually been contacted fairly recently by a family that had a language barrier, so they needed a Spanish-speaking therapist and also an LGBT knowledgeable and culturally competent therapist, and there just aren't any in the area. So the person that we're partnering with has some experience in this area and is actually really excited about working with this population.
And how, one person would not be enough, right?
No.
One therapist would not meet the needs, I suspect. No. And so is the idea to find a therapist and sort of flush them out, so to say, like find them and make sure that they're identified, and you can sort of be the person that the organization that connects those who need it with those.
Exactly. A large part of the outreach we'll be doing is trying to not only determine which services are needed, which is information we'll get from the community itself, but also who it is locally or regionally that already provides these services, so that we can be a conduit to get people the help they need.
No, that's critical. I can only imagine. What about your organization in terms of how many are right now? Is it just the two of you, or tell us more?
We're
I mean, are you
lone
looking for
rangers.
volunteers? Because this is such an important. I mean, obviously Massachusetts is a fairly progressive state.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we are lucky to live where we live. But still, I mean, are you looking for volunteers? I mean, how can we help you maybe spread the word? I mean.
Yes. So. As Nikita stated, we are in the beginning stages. So right now, technically, it's the two of us. But we have done a lot of outreach already, and there's several organizations and businesses that want to be involved. So we're actually having 2 informational sessions, February 6th and February 20th, at the Ellsby Street campus of Bristol Community College in K Building, room 119. That'll be at 4:30. Again, it's both days,
Okay.
Where we'll be providing information about how we'd like to move forward and hoping to recruit volunteers and generate buy-in from the community so that we can move forward with the projects that we'd like.
That's great, and I'll see how we can help you spread the word on that.
That's great. That'd be great.
Tell us if you could maybe. We talked about the services that you can offer. What about the current state of legal issues in Massachusetts when it comes to LGBT community? What is currently? I mean, we have come such a long way.
We have.
But I'm sure there is more that can be done.
Yeah, so as you said, we're a pretty progressive state, and we are very fortunate. I feel very fortunate to live in Massachusetts. It is one of the places that LGBT identified persons have the most protections under the law. And that's dating back to 2003 with the marriage equality decision here in Massachusetts. We became the first state to have protection for same-sex marriages. And since then, we have a pretty broad anti-discrimination law, which includes not only sexual orientation, but gender identity and HIV status. And that applies across the board to employment, credit, loans, in housing, and in public accommodation, which actually I hope we all just voted yes on question 3 this past fall to allow persons of any gender identity to use whatever bathroom corresponds to their own gender identity. However, in one area particularly that impacts youth, Massachusetts does not currently have a ban on conversion therapy. For those people who don't know, conversion therapy is a practice of either psychological or spiritual intervention where it's believed that you can convert someone's sexual orientation to heterosexual. And a lot of the practices used in conversion therapy would otherwise be deemed abusive. They use electroshock convulsive therapy. They at times will sort of induce a person to have a nauseous or vomiting experience while watching homoerotic images to try to create some psychological barrier to your natural attraction. And our neighbors in Rhode Island actually have a ban on conversion therapy, but we don't yet, which is kind of surprising to a lot of people since we have really strong protections against bullying in schools for kids. We have GSAs across the state.
Can you speak, what is GSA?
Yeah, do you want to speak about GSAs? You were in one.
Yeah, the GSA is the Gay Straight Alliance.
Oh, okay.
It's really geared towards the youth throughout local high schools, or actually throughout Massachusetts high schools. There's several chapters, but it really allows the youth to be more involved in their community and kind of have a support network in the school system.
Yeah, so there are all these protections embodied in the Massachusetts Anti-Discrimination Statute. This sort of, at least for me, one glaring gap, at least with regard to youth, right? Because if you're a minor, your parents can send you to camp, right? and there's not much you can do about
Do
it.
you know why it's still on the books? Is it
I-
part of, sometimes I know that sometimes something is part of a statute that it's sort of,
I think
it's
we
the way
haven't.
it's harder to repeal.
No, I think we just
No?
haven't pushed hard back,
Yeah,
yet,
okay.
pushed hard enough.
It hasn't been a
yet.
huge
We
priority?
haven't,
Yeah.
I think there were other things, like housing discrimination, which is a concern, especially for the elderly. We now have a generation of older LGBT adults, of which there's a large percentage of people over the age of 55 in Bristol County.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got this whole bucket of people who are growing old together and may face, and definitely in other states, there have been a couple of cases that are pretty high profile where they've faced discrimination in housing. One recent case out of Missouri, a lesbian couple applied to live in a, I think not elder housing, like assisted living facility. You know, they checked it out, they did a tour, they'd fill out the application, left a deposit, and then they got a response that said, this facility qualifies marriage as between one man and one woman, so the two of you, although you've been together for 40 years and are married legally, you can't live here. And the judge in that case actually earlier this month, dismissed the case, stating that his interpretation of the Fair Housing Act was that it protects you against sex discrimination, not sexual orientation discrimination.
Interesting.
So we'll see where that goes. I'll be following that for the rest of the year.
And
See.
I'm sure that you're going to try to appeal, but
Yes, I'm sure. But we also have a lot of elders in Bristol County who live in subsidized housing.
That's
and-
federal, right?
Yes.
So
A case out of Illinois, which actually got decided in favor of the victim in that case. This elderly woman had been experiencing bullying by the other residents at the facility. She lived alone, and she's disabled, like many elders in these facilities are. And the landlord was found to be responsible to take some action to prevent discrimination against her by the other residents, based on the Fair Housing Act. So it's really interesting how, still the middle of the country, Illinois, Missouri, really different outcomes in those cases.
You and I talked about it a
Yes.
while ago, how we sort of live in our little bubbles.
We're in a little New England
Yeah.
bubble.
Another question, while we're still covering the legal aspect of it, insurance discrimination.
Yes.
Tell me more about it. Tell us more about that. How does that work?
Massachusetts bans discrimination in health care on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression.
Okay.
Which, just not to get too technical, but the way that you express yourself outwardly via your clothes, your hairstyle, whatever, is not necessarily your gender identity. So that's once again, we have a pretty broad language there. And for the most part, insurers in Massachusetts are not allowed to discriminate against someone who's transitioning for transgendered persons. Certainly, Mass Health is not allowed to do so. Health care for transgendered prisoners is statutorily mandated. Recently, actually, also this month, a transgendered prisoner was moved to a women's prison as part of his, protection and her safety, as well as for her health care. However, in 37 states, private health insurers can discriminate against you based on whether or not you're transgender. And that can mean that you get no treatment to aid in your transition. And for people who don't know, folks transitioning are generally on a set of hormones for several years. Statutorily, they have to go through at least 2 years of psychiatric care, so that they're diagnosed with whatever the DSM diagnosis is, so that you can actually get permission to have surgery. And so trying to pay for that out of pocket because an insurer won't cover any of the cost of these is generally cost prohibitive for the average person. And also, in those states, without these protections, it gets a lot more basic. If we take it away from sort of the transgender and the surgical question and hormones and stuff, I could walk into a PCP in one of these states and they could deny me care because they could just say, well, we don't treat LGBT persons here. So I wouldn't get basic flu shot, et cetera, et cetera. I'd have to maybe travel really far away from where I live to get basic health care for you know, common cold, yearly visits, just to find anyone who would accept treating me. So that's a hurdle that I think collectively as a national population, we still have to address a lot of these other issues that maybe we relaxed a little bit when we kind of gained all this momentum with marriage, because as you know, with marriage comes a whole bucket of rights and privileges that you don't otherwise have as a single person or as a unmarried couple. But there are still all these sort of more nuanced things that we generally take for granted until we're faced with them as a barrier.
So to your point, if there is a married couple and we try to look at the insurance issue, if you get married, you get your spouse's insurance, and then you decide to transition.
If you're in one of those 37 states, they can deny you.
They can deny you. Because it's not covered. But if you're in Massachusetts, in
Massachusetts, you're safe.
You're safe for now.
In the bubble.
You're safe for now. We're in the bubble.
Yeah, we're in the bubble. What is? Let's talk about what you are planning. You had some. You're thinking of doing a big event. You want to share a little about it?
Sure. We're planning on hosting a first annual block party Pride event on June 1st here in Fall River. Our goal is really to involve, as we mentioned earlier, the GSA, local GSAs from Somerset, Fall River, and local areas, maybe New Bedford if willing to participate, to kind of bring the youth in to develop their own project and celebrate together the Pride Month.
Yeah, we also think it's important to increase the visibility of the LGBT community here. There's we're in the bubble, but we're also not oblivious to the fact that just because the law protects us doesn't mean certain biases and prejudices don't still exist.
Absolutely.
And we're and I don't mean this in a disparaging way at all, but we're in a really highly immigrant, predominantly Catholic county. And so there's a difference between acceptance and tolerance, right? And normalcy. I think normalizing seeing and interacting with LGBT persons, which in part is stuff like throwing events, but also raising the awareness that there's a large population, a lot of them are business owners, businesses that you happen to frequent. Just because they don't put a flag outside doesn't mean you may have not known this whole time, and what are you going to stop going now? But I think that that's a way to increase acceptance, to normalize that which is different, right? We tend to, as humans, be scared of what we don't understand, of what we don't know,
Absolutely.
right? And so, the events like having a Pride, I think, is not just beneficial to youth who face their own host of health disparities, especially LGBT youth, but also I think it can help the broader community, be aware that we're here and be more, less, not afraid, but maybe satiate some curiosity, alleviate some anxiety and normalize some of and maybe answer some questions that they might have as well.
So I noticed that you mentioned other communities next to, when you mentioned the block party. So even though it's FR Pride, and I assume it's not for Fall River, but it is Greater Fall River, right? I mean, I assume it's, so you are, you are looking to establish relationships and help others in the area, regardless of where they live. In terms of, we started talking about your mission and how you created this organization because there is a need for social services and sort of help those, who identify themselves to be in the group or who need help dealing with that someone in their family may be. But what are some of the issues? What are some specific, from social work perspective, what are some of the specific issues that you see? Are mental health issues? Are these, what is it? We talked about getting someone to help. But can we get a little more specific?
Well, Massachusetts has the second highest population of LGBT self-identified individuals in the country. We're next to Vermont, actually.
I didn't know that.
61% of LGBT youth in Massachusetts experience some level of depression or mental health issues. Almost 40% of that group report still being in the closet or living in intolerant households. So that contributes largely to a bigger issue of bullying and threatening behaviors that can occur at home, or can, like with that one case that we had with the family.
We were approached by a family that had used corporal punishment on their daughter when she came out.
Yes.
And so the difficulty is that now they're in a, they open a DCF case, which is the procedure when there's child abuse, right? And now DCF generally tries to keep families together. But without culturally competent care for this family, it's not really clear that...
Right, there's no treatment there.
Yeah, it's not really clear how that dynamic would work in this family, right? Because you have a preteen teenager who comes out to a family that's completely intolerant and thinks the solution is to beat her up.
Yeah.
Right?
And then we have a teenager with hormones on top of it.
That's its own package.
Absolutely. Yes. And that extends into the school, and it has a trickling effect.
So in this situation, what is the solution?
In this situation, exactly. So now you have sort of government involvement in the family, where the government is going to default to their policy of trying to keep the family together, but that doesn't take into account necessarily the mental health impact it might have on this child, who is in a kind of really special time of life generally for all kids at that age. They're developing not just their identity, but their hormones are all over the place. And also how and whether or not that family is going to be able to gain a true understanding of what this means for her. How to teach them to accept her if that's possible, how to keep her safe if it's possible to keep her in that home. And to Nikita's point, it kind of gets exacerbated by situations that are already happening at school, right? If she's not in a tolerant school environment, she's not in a tolerant home environment, the chances of her facing a mental health issue that may go untreated, and then,
could lead to, negative coping.
And then we're talking about substance abuse and other things. Now, you mentioned cultural
competency.
Tell us, what is that? Is it I have a feeling I know, but
for us, excuse me.
It's a tongue twister.
It is a tongue twister. Cultural competency is the ability to understand and communicate with and effectively interact with people who are different than us. We all kind of interpret life through our own personal lenses and develop our own beliefs and worldviews from our own personal experiences. Often when we're interacting with people whose life kind of is different than ours. We can treat them more negatively sometimes if we're not understanding of it. And for us, it's about learning about the differences that allow us to make that shift in our own personal cultural lenses, to develop positive attitude towards other people, and you know, appreciate the things that do make us unique.
Now, going back to what you mentioned earlier about the CF case, I just something popped into my head, so I'm going to ask. I'm not sure if that's something that even is there such thing as LGBT foster care? Has that concept even existed, or is it too radical?
So I don't think it's too radical. So there's not a specific, and I don't think that the government could specify like,
I mean, maybe
you're going
LGBT
into
friendly. I don't know how you call it, because
for sure, Massachusetts, the foster care program is welcome and opening to same-sex or single LGBT persons who want to foster or adopt through DCF.
okay.
So it's entirely possible that if at the end of her case they're placing her in another home, it's possible she might get placed in a home of somebody or a couple who does identify.
Okay.
It's not necessarily the case that she has to be raised by LGBT.
No, absolutely.
No.
I was just thinking more LGBT friendly. Maybe
DCF,
that's what I was
DCF
thinking.
actually, they're really open and really welcoming of same-sex families. And we know several same-sex families who've actually adopted through DCF, and said it was a wonderful process for them. And I think actually some of their promotional materials focus on same-sex parenting and stuff. But it's also important just generally to note that in Massachusetts, DCF is fine with single persons fostering. You know, they really have an open and broad program in that sense. You know. So yeah, no, that's a great question.
No, I just thought about it, and I just didn't know, so I figured I'll ask because if I have that question, maybe someone in our audience may as well. So I think we are getting close. Anything else you'd like our audience to know? I mean, what if someone? I'm sure there is going to be viewers who would like to get involved. Maybe someone who needs help. Maybe someone who has a question. How can they contact you? Where can they stay updated on your events?
So the website, which is livepridefully.org, is there's a contact email address for any questions that anybody may have, and some more general information about what we do, what we're trying to do. And then the Facebook page will have current events, some postings, and as we move forward, as I said, the informational sessions, folks can get more information there. Hopefully we'll have some more of those. There is a directory on our website of local allied and LGBT businesses. So anyone who owns a business, runs a business, and would like to talk to us about being placed on the directory are more than welcome to reach out via email. That's not really a resource list for medical care. It's just sort of meant to be a list of local safe spaces or businesses or individual entrepreneurs who want to make it known that they offer inclusive services.
Okay.
No,
that's great. And then, of course, if there is an issue or some from social work perspective, if someone needs help, they can also contact you. If nothing else, you can point them in the right direction.
Exactly.
And sort of help navigate the murky waters of law and social services.
Yes.
And medicine and medical care. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This was very informational.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We learned a lot. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Stay tuned for more of Bristol Legal and help us spread the word and share. Thank you.